15 shot in Chicago. Mourners at a funeral home pull out their own guns and fire back. Focus on China. Congress takes on Beijing, plus what the ambassador at large for international religious freedom is saying. Approving bishops in China. 2 years since a historic agreement, and whether it's helping the faithful in the communist country. And removing a saint. A county in California considers taking St. Junipero Serra off its seal. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump promotes Operation Warp Speed, the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. There is now a contract for the delivery of millions of doses, and the president is making an appeal to Americans to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
Here at the White House, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, talked more about that deal with Pfizer regarding the vaccines, and the president urged people to put on their masks. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, discusses plans to deliver a vaccine to U.S. citizens later this year.
If it goes well, we anticipate about 100 million doses in this country if it's safe and effective, which of course is always the most important two criteria in that order.
Conway says it's part of the administration's Operation Warp Speed, which President Donald Trump outlined back in May.
Talk about the work not stopping. We've really watched the FDA and others just knock down the red tape and the regulations that usually get in the way of these therapeutics and vaccines coming to market in a reasonable time.
President Trump now encouraging people to wear masks.
Whether you like the mask or not, they have an impact, they'll have an effect, and we need everything we can get.
California surpassed New York in confirmed virus cases, topping 409,000. Florida hit hard too. One school superintendent there laid out the numbers near him.
We have over 40,000 cases, probably another 1,200 each day, over 500 deaths, an infection rate that exceeds 16%. You cannot open schools in that type of environment. If you do, you will have to close your doors shortly thereafter, and you're going to spread infection throughout your community.
It will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better. Something I don't like saying about things, but that's the way it is.
But the president says there are ways to slow the spread.
We are imploring young Americans to avoid packed bars and other crowded indoor gatherings, be safe and be smart.
Finally tonight, the president says more vaccines are entering the final stages of clinical trials, and once they're ready to go, if they work, the military is standing by, ready to deliver them across the country to Americans. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Police in Chicago say 15 people were shot outside of a funeral home last night. The incident quickly escalated.
A black vehicle speeding westbound on 79th Street in the 1000 block began firing at attendees of a funeral. At that time, the attendees of the funeral exchanged gunfire with the black vehicle. Black vehicle then turned northbound down Carpenter. Upon going northbound down Carpenter, they continued to fire at the attendees of the funeral.
Investigators are questioning one suspect. The shooting on Chicago's South Side comes as the Department of Homeland Security is planning to send dozens of federal agents to the city. And coming up later in the show, we have analysis of the Trump administration's decision to send federal agents to some U.S. cities. As part of a defense spending bill, House lawmakers voted this week to ban federal employees from downloading the app TikTok on government-issued phones due to national security concerns related to the Chinese-owned app. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, lawmakers tell EWTN that there's more to TikTok than meets the eye. Not only does it allow the Chinese government to see the lives of Americans, but also all of our personal information is then transferred through the internet onto Chinese government-owned servers. And that's not the only concern. U.S. lawmakers say that they're also concerned about the religious and human rights abuses taking place in the communist country.
The Chinese Communist Party is using TikTok to collect massive amounts of data from American citizens and our government.
By a margin of 336 to 71, the House on Monday voted to ban the Chinese app TikTok from phones of federal employees. Senator Angus King questions the timing.
They've been stealing intellectual property for 20 years. There certainly is a good reason to confront China. My concern is escalating this tension. Is it really about confronting China, or does it have something to do with an election in 4 months?
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo responds to critics.
Your point that this has been going on for a long time makes our point. President Trump has said enough.
Announcing today he has ordered China to close its consulate in Houston, Texas.
We are setting out clear expectations for how the Chinese Communist Party is going to behave. And when they don't, we're going to take actions that protect the American people.
A Chinese government spokesman called the order, quote, an outrageous and unjustified move that will sabotage relations between the two countries. Ambassador Sam Brownback tells me the Chinese government's crackdown on religion has gotten worse over the last 3 to 4 years. In June 2019, the Vatican publicly asked China's leaders to stop pressuring clergy who wanted to remain loyal to the Pope, rather than submitting to control by Communist Party officials.
When Xi Jinping came in, he decided we're going to go back to the real model of communism. And that model is an atheistic model.
He says the Chinese government is threatened by their people's belief in God and will continue to suppress religion.
You've got cameras everywhere and artificial intelligence systems to identify who's there and to limit you if you don't toe the line that they want.
And just today, Republican Senator Josh Hawley's bill to ban TikTok from all government devices passed on committee, and it's now headed to the Senate floor. So this is not the last that we're going to hear about holding China accountable. Tracy?
All right. Thank you so much, Eric. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. A report says a region in northern China is ordering Christians to replace pictures of Jesus with photos of Chairman Mao. If they resist, their welfare payments will be cut off. The magazine Bitter Winter reports that officials in the Shanxi province told people to inspect their homes and remove religious symbols. Also in China, it has been nearly 2 years since the Vatican's provisional deal with Beijing over the appointment of bishops. This September, the accord will expire and a decision to renew will be made. Joining us now is Father Bernardo Cervellera, editor-in-chief of AsiaNews, and he is following the impact of the provisional agreement on the Catholic Church in China. Father, thank you so much for coming on. I know after 2 years of the Vatican-China deal, is it helping the faithful in China?
It is, on one hand, they hope, the Catholics in China hope that through this relationship between the Vatican and China, things could be better from the point of view of the freedom of religion. But the fact is that this freedom of religion has been reduced a lot. The Catholics say we have not lost our faith in the Church, in Jesus Christ, and our respect for the Pope. But the difficulties have become very, very heavy because priests, underground priests, are chased from their parishes, churches are closed, and above all, the minors, means children, minor of 18 years old, they are not allowed at all to enter the churches, to join in the masses, and to have catechism classes.
Oh, Father, we just heard a report that some Christians in China are being told to replace images of Christ with those of Chairman Mao. What are some of the rules the Chinese government enforces on the Catholic Church?
It is compulsory to put the Chinese flag on the buildings of the churches, temples, or every other religions. That is, they must be sinicized. It means they must be shown as a China work, some very important aspect of this culture. The point is that this sinicization is done eliminating crosses from the bell tower and putting the Chinese flag, or eliminating mosaics or paintings and putting the photo of Xi Jinping or Mao Zedong, or some so-called important value for the communism. This is really something absolutely too much for the freedom of religion. To cynicize doesn't mean that the Communist Party must eliminate aspects from the faith, from the Catholic faith.
We also know that 2 new bishops were appointed last year with Pope Francis's blessing. What has their leadership been like, and has there been any additional changes?
Let me precise one thing, first of all. Many so-called Vatican experts or China experts, they say that these bishops are a fruit of the agreement. In reality, the ordination of these 2 bishops or the recognition of these 2 bishops have been decided much time before the agreement. So this agreement in reality has not produced any new bishop. This is the point. So in some way it is fruitless. And what is their authority? The point is that to be recognized by the government, they have to sign to join in the so-called independent church, which is a very ambiguous term, because independent church in China is always meant a church independent from the Holy See. However, perhaps now they might have changed, so it can be, but it's not sure. Anyway, this independent church must also support always the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, and to support the fact that the minors shouldn't have a religious education, which is the contrary of the gospel, because the gospel says, "Let the children come to me." So Jesus said. But it seems that the bishops of China should do the contrary.
Well, Father, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your insights with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks to you.
Police arrested 34 protesters in Jerusalem last night. Thousands rallied outside of Parliament and also at the office of the Prime Minister. They are angry at Benjamin Netanyahu, whose corruption trial just resumed. They also accuse him of mishandling the country's economic crisis. Nearly 50,000 people have signed an online petition asking church officials to waive the 5-year waiting period to start a sainthood cause for a Brazil bishop who died from COVID-19. Bishop Henrique Soares da Costa died last week at age 57. The petition asked the Vatican to waive its 5-year waiting period to open a sainthood cause. Bishop da Costa was a popular figure on the internet. One of his online video channels had nearly 100,000 subscribers. The coronavirus pandemic in Australia is getting worse. One state is reporting a record 484 cases today, and officials are saying the worst may be yet to come.
Second wave, if we are going to call it is very different to the first wave that we've gone through for a whole bunch of reasons. The population's affected, the fact that we're all rather fatigued, we're all a bit inured to the numbers.
The city of Melbourne has been in lockdown for 2 weeks. Starting tomorrow, everyone in the quarantine areas will be required to wear a mask outside. Mexico's death toll from COVID-19 has officially surpassed 40,000 people. Yellow signs warn people of high-risk zones in Mexico City. More than 350,000 cases have been reported in Mexico. And yesterday, 7,000 new cases and 915 deaths were recorded. In the Dominican Republic, President Danilo Medina issued a state of emergency on Monday. He is trying to prevent hospitals from getting overwhelmed from an increase in COVID-19 cases. The state of emergency will last 45 days. Coming up, Ryan Anderson weighs in on a transgender lawsuit against a Catholic hospital. Plus, a county in California makes an announcement about St. Junipero Serra. pro-lifers in Michigan say they are dropping a petition drive to prohibit a second trimester abortion procedure in the state. Officials say the campaign did not produce enough valid signatures. The state's Right to Life group says that it will not dispute that conclusion and instead will focus on the elections this November. Officials in one part of California are considering removing St. Junipero Serra from their county seal. St. Serra is shown on the seal for Ventura County, just northwest of Los Angeles, with a mission church in the background. The pastor at one of the missions founded by the saint says elected representatives do not know St. Serra's true history of helping Native Americans. The University of Maryland St. Joseph Medical Center, a Catholic hospital, faces a lawsuit from a person who presents as a transgender man because it would not perform a hysterectomy on the person's healthy uterus. A statement from the hospital reads in part, "As a Catholic hospital, UMSJMC abides by the 6th edition of ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services as outlined by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which provide authoritative guidance on certain healthcare issues and practices, including limitations on the removal of healthy organs. All Catholic hospitals in the U.S., including UMSJMC, are bound by these directives." Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Ryan is also the author of the book, When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Ryan, welcome back to the show. So good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the plaintiff in this case is claiming discrimination, saying that surgery would not have been canceled if it were not for the diagnosis other than gender dysphoria, which is described by the American Psychiatric Association as a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender in which they identify. What is your reaction to that?
There's no discrimination going on here. What we have here is a disagreement about the proper medical treatment for gender dysphoria. Some doctors, hospitals, healthcare systems think that sex reassignment procedures are the appropriate medical treatment. And other doctors and hospitals and healthcare systems think that it's not the appropriate treatment. And so the idea here that we're going to treat a disagreement about the best medical care for an underlying condition as if it's discrimination based on a person's identity kind of gets things exactly upside down. Good medicine doesn't remove healthy organs from the healthy person's body. And that's what's at stake here. A Catholic hospital will remove a cancerous uterus, but they won't remove a healthy uterus.
I know that you've studied this topic quite a bit. Let's talk about sex as it relates to good medical practice, and how important is it to recognize those differences?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that doctors and scientists are increasingly discovering is how important the sexed body is for good medicine, that diseases impact males and females in different ways, and that medicines and various therapeutics actually impact male and female bodies in different ways. At one point, they were using only male subjects to test various drugs. And then they realized that the right dosage for a male might not be the right dose for a female, that the way in which a disease impacts the male body may not be the way that it impacts a female body. And so we need both men and women for clinical trials, and men and women to kind of titrate the right dose, the right procedure to the specific body. And so you can't treat male and female bodies as interchangeable.
As we pointed out, the hospital clearly states on its website that it observes the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. Shouldn't those religious concerns be considered?
Oh, of course. I mean, part of the founding nature of the United States of America is that we respect religious liberty, right? It's the first right in the First Amendment to our Constitution that's articulated, the free exercise of religion. So even if you disagree with the Catholic position on what good medicine looks like for gender dysphoria, there's no reason why you should say that the Catholic hospital has to abide by secular guidelines for healthcare, why progressive understanding of medicine should govern a Catholic hospital. One of the things that I think we're going to have to increasingly wrestle with is how do we coexist in a society where we have deep disagreements of foundational issues about identity, about life, about health, about medicine. And it can't simply be that the government can coerce the Catholic hospital into violating its beliefs about what good medicine looks like.
Oh, Ryan, thanks so much for coming on. We always appreciate your insight. Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book, When Harry Became Sally, responding to the transgender moment. Thanks again, Ryan.
Yep, thank you.
Up next, a diocese in Virginia celebrates its 200th anniversary with a message of hope. Oregon's Attorney General has filed a lawsuit asking for a restraining order against federal agents who have been sent to Portland to quell protests there. A federal judge heard arguments in that case today. The suit alleges federal agents sent by President Donald Trump have arrested people with no probable cause, whisked protesters away in unmarked cars, and used excessive force. An attorney for the U.S. government called the motion extraordinary. Joining me now to talk more about the use of federal officers is Adam White, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and law professor at the Antonin Scalia Law School. Adam, welcome back. Great to see you.
Good evening. Good to be back.
So federal officers are in place right now in Portland, and as we reported earlier in the show, the administration is considering sending them to Chicago as well to help quell the violence there. What are your thoughts on that? Is that the way to go?
Well, federal buildings and federal programs, they don't exist at the pleasure of states and localities. Ultimately, it's up to the federal government to protect its own buildings and its own operations. And so I don't fault the Trump administration for reallocating resources in the middle of protests and violent activity to protect federal resources. At the same time, I think it's incumbent upon the administration to be as transparent as possible about who's going there, what legal authority they're going there under, and what precisely they're doing in service of their mission.
Portland's mayor says the presence of federal troops is escalating the violence there. What do you think about that?
Well, the violence seems to have escalated just fine on its own. Obviously, we shouldn't take lightly the risk that a deployment of resources will inflame the situation. But ultimately, I think that as long as the Trump administration can do this in a restrained way that makes clear what its mission is and what it's trying to protect and makes clear the threat that they're facing, I don't blame them for going. But of course, in the current times with inflamed sentiments on all sides, I think it really is incumbent upon the administration to be as transparent as possible here.
Well, many officials in states where there's been implemented or considered are resisting it, calling this move unconstitutional. Does the federal government have the authority to overrule them?
Well, yes, the federal government's federal laws and the Constitution are supreme over state and local law. There is no all-purpose federal police force. Federal police forces such as Customs and Border Patrol and ATF and others, the U.S. Marshals, they have to conduct their work according to missions that are prescribed under federal law. So they do need to restrain themselves in that respect. But like I said at the outset, federal buildings, federal programs don't exist at the pleasure of local and state governments. Ultimately, the federal programs are superior, and they can't be threatened or infringed by state and local governments.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate your insight. Adam White, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and law professor at the Antonin Scalia Law School. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, the Diocese of Richmond in Virginia is celebrating its 200th anniversary, and its leader used the occasion to deliver a message of hope. In a homily earlier this month, Bishop Barry Nestout asked God to give the diocese a new birth, that a new springtime for all of its faithful. He also said the current pandemic is a reminder that all people are called to center their lives not around an ideology nor a movement, but around Christ. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.